My boss, Danny, is a prick. He drives an obnoxious Crayola yellow Porsche and says, Porsche, like the word itself was having a thought and stroked out halfway through. And he eats apples in a gross way. But this story isn't really about Danny. It's about Danny's protege, Bethany, and her god-awful mandatory office festivities. 2 Fridays ago, we celebrated National Navajo Accountants and Comptrollers Day. For anyone with Google, or Bing, I guess, you should be able to find out in 10 seconds or so that NNACD isn't a fucking thing. It never has been. It never will be. But Bethany ordered a fiscally responsible bust of a Native American chief. One that was made of corn, beans, and squash. And we were told that it was offensive not to eat it. Yep. Now, I might actually be alone in my distaste for Bethany. She's very pretty, and I think she went to Vassar or something. And, generally speaking, her main flaw is her enthusiasm. But it bothers me. Hey everyone! We're having cake in 10 to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of Donald passing his kidney stone. That was something I actually heard last Tuesday. I looked to Don, who was already eating a very drippy French dip sandwich at his desk. He smiled over the wall of his cubicle in a bizarre, dewy-eyed reverence and said, "She remembered." What? That's not normal, right? Fiona, a young woman who sits across from me, blew a bit of her recently dyed magenta bangs out of her eyes and shrugged. Better than working, right? She had me there. And look, I'm not a cake hater. I love cake. I love not working. But that, too, is part of the issue. Because of all the celebrations, I almost never actually work. I've been at my job for almost 8 months, and I'm still not entirely sure what I do. Whenever I get asked at social gatherings, I say that I'm a consultant. But I know that's not true. The only thing I've ever really consulted is a Fathers of Daughters of Mothers of Others Day lasagna, or pickle cactus, or whatever the fuck. The vagueness of my duties was bound to catch up with me eventually, but the true anxiety I harbor towards my job began last Tuesday. Which brings me back to Danny. I was closing a Super Nintendo ROM on my computer and preparing to go eat kidney cake when I saw Danny doing a Lumbergian hover over my desk. "You okay, old sport?" he asked, pouting and lowering his chin down onto the cubicle so only his head was visible. He calls me old sport often. I think it's an affect he picked up to let people know he's read a book. And that book was The Great Gatsby. I'm honestly kind of impressed. So, maybe his affect works. He doesn't really seem to have the constitution for literacy. But anyway. Yeah, boss. You look sickly. It's not cholera, is it? It's going around. Cholera? Like from Oregon Trail? No. I feel fine. But I did have a question about... I think it's cholera, old sport. It can be fatal if untreated, and I don't want your blood vomiting to get in the way of our productivity. He was slowly sinking lower and lower beneath the cubicle, his mouth disappearing, then his nose. You should go see the nurse on the 3rd floor. He'll help you, old sport. With that, his eyes sunk out of view, followed by the top of his head. It was weird. And Danny isn't weird. He's a novelty douchebag wrapped in a necktie. But I heard him whispering like a weirdo. He's not Somnicorp material, honey. He's not. Honey? I half stood and craned my neck over the cubicle to see what he was doing. He was crouched, slowly stroking the carpet with his hand, still whispering. Hey, Danny? Are you okay? He didn't look up. He just guffawed and said, "Paper clips." and then he sort of scuttled away, still crouching low and brushing his hands against the carpet as he rounded a corner out of sight. I looked around, scanned the beige maze of workstations for signs of life. Nothing. People love cake. They had gone to cake. Who could blame them for not being there to witness their boss going non-compos mentis in the middle of a fucking Tuesday? I didn't end up getting cake that day, but I did end up going to the 3rd floor, completely blanking on the fact that elementary schools have nurses, not offices. But I think I was just happy to get away from everyone for a while. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, even though our office is on the 5th. The stairs have a sign on them that just says, "Don't," and that's a bit ominous. So, I figured I'd just wait until Staircase Appreciation Day or some similarly fake holiday to maul that particular wildebeest. If you've ever worked in an office building, you know that most floors have nothing to do with you. People like Bethany might see a 10-story work tomb as an adventure, but I'm not her, and consequently, I'm not familiar with every floor. I had never been to the 3rd floor, for example, but I was expecting something more or less like offices. My expectations failed me immediately as the elevator doors opened to a mostly empty floor. There were pillars here and there, some structural and some supporting sinewy collections of colored cables. But other than that, the only thing I saw was an extremely out-of-place structure towards the back of the place. This is going to sound crazy, but it looked like the bottom 10 feet of a barn. "Hello?" I shouted. My voice echoed off the empty, window-heavy walls, and was immediately joined by a bleat, like from a goat, which, a moment later, I discovered was exactly what had made it. The goat exited the barn cubicle thing, barnacle, and was followed by a portly John C. Reilly type in a dirty white lab coat. Hi?" I said, suddenly alarmed as Nurse Reilly came trundling toward me. Then he ran past me, wild, potato-faced determination creasing his expression into something desperate. I turned to see the elevator doors bump shut, and the nurse yelled, "Fuck!" "Sorry, did I do something wrong? You're the nurse, right? Or motherfucking fuck!" He slumped down in front of the doors, huffed, and pulled out what looked like a joint from his pocket. He lit it. It sure as hell smelled like a joint. Then he took a long drag and grumbled to himself. "Are you okay, man?" I asked, trying to pull a touch of empathy from utter confusion. He sighed in response. "You smoke pot, kid?" He offered the joint, face awash in resignation. I didn't know how to answer that question. He was a medical professional, I assumed, and I was at work. But I personally find John C. Reilly types eminently trustworthy, so I answered him truthfully, by taking the joint and not answering him at all. As it turned out, the nurse's name was Beverly, and he wasn't a nurse. He was a veterinarian. But to hear him tell it, he really was more of a prisoner stuck in a Groundhog's Day-style time loop. And as I searched the walls adjacent to the elevator, I realized that there were no buttons. I was a prisoner too. And the more I smoked, the more believable Dr. Beverly seemed, and the more sense he made. Also, the beleaguered guy was easy to talk to. "So, Dr. Bev, how'd you get here?" He stamped out the butt of the joint and pocketed it. "I used to work here, and then one day this wonder bitch Stephanie gathered everyone together for Amulet Heritage Day. We ate bagels with fucking Thousand Island dressing and went around in a circle trying on this topaz amulet. When the amulet got to me, well, I blacked out and ended up here." Stephanie. "Dr. Bev, I don't think Amulet Heritage Day is a thing. He lazily patted the head of the goat, which now rested in his lap. No shit, kid. It's just Beverly. Or Dr. Crusher, if you want to keep being weird and deferential. Wait, Dr. Beverly Crusher? Yeah, he answered, solemnly looking off toward the barnacle. Hell of a thing, ain't it? To boldly go fucking nowhere. I swallowed his pessimism and felt it course through me. So, there's no way out? What about the windows? Fuck me. You know, as long as I've been trapped here, I never thought to try that angle. I couldn't tell if the guy was being sarcastic or just lovably oafish, but I wanted to help Beverly Crusher. His time loop explanation seemed far-fetched, and I figured that it was far more likely that he had become the victim of poor office design and isolation, that he was a man broken by circumstance, a friend of goats, and quite possibly an amateur set designer, given the barn. I found a rusted hunk of something heavy and utilitarian propped up against one of the cable columns. I lugged it over to one of the windows, lifted it above my head, and immediately dropped it with a scream that made excellent use of the surprisingly good acoustics of the room. "What the fuck is that?" I shouted, staring at a thing that wasn't quite a man. It smiled serenely and laboriously ambled across the surface of the glass on its 5.5 crooked limbs like some nightmarish gecko. Bev laughed hoarsely, and the goat murmured a sleepy goatish sound. "Freakish little weirdo, isn't he?" Bev said after the laughter died down. "I call him Frank, but I have no idea what he is. He's just part of this, whatever the hell this is. What does he want? Oh, to get in. He did the first time I did this. I smashed the window and, well, the amount of guts you keep inside your belly are inversely proportional to the amount of Frank inside this room. Best to leave him." Frank climbed mostly out of view and settled above the top edge of the window, but I could still see the upper half of his head, his eyes peering in spiderishly. I shivered, and by the time I had turned around, Bev was back at the barnacle, and the goat was sleeping by the elevator. "So, why'd you come here, kid? To the 3rd floor, I mean." I looked away from Frank and instinctively covered my belly with my hands. "My boss said I had cholera, and Bethany got a kidney stone anniversary cake for Dawn, but everyone I work with thought it was normal. They always do." Bev rooted around in a wooden crate and produced a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "You on the 5th floor?" he asked. "Yeah." "Somnicorp?" "Yep." He took a swig and wiped his mouth with the heel of his hand. "Huh. Your Bethany's probably my Stephanie. You know that, right?" "Yeah." "Fuck." Bev passed me the bottle, and I took a prisoner's pull from it. "I'm not going back to work, am I, Bev?" He shrugged. Maybe it's just as well," I mumbled. "I don't really know what to do. I've always been in these bizarre work parties, and by the time I get back to my desk, it's time to leave. Now it's been too long to ask questions, you know?" Bev frowned and snatched back the bottle. "Sounds very consequential, your dilemma. But pardon me if I don't sit here and fiddle for you while you mope. I live in a minor hellscape here. You just need a therapist, kid. And fortunately, I ain't that kind of doctor." I spent the rest of the day finishing the bottle slowly with Bev, and occasionally going over to pat the goat or try the elevator doors. I tried my phone, too, but every call routed to some sort of 1950s-style operator who always connected me with a nonverbal heavy breather. I stopped trying after a while. Any expenditure of energy seemed to rouse the excitement of Frank, who would tap the windows or fog the glass with giddy breaths, and I think I began to understand why Bev was the way he was. By 3 p.m. or so, I began to get sleepy. There wasn't a lot to do on the 3rd floor. apart from feeling dreadful and reading one of Bev's 2 books. A Merc veterinary manual and a copy of the Decameron. Both fed my fatigue. And when sleep came, it came abruptly. Looks like somebody has a case of the run days. I startled to wake at my desk and groggily lifted my eyes to a treacherously smiling face. What? I rasped. The words slid out sandpaperishly across my vocal cords. Bethany narrowed her eyes slightly. I said somebody has a case of the Mondays, and you have a sticky note on your face that says OMULETTE. That's not how you spell omelet. I peeled it off and tried to slow the spin of my mind with a dozen mental handholds, none of which made sense. What day is it, Bethany? She continued narrowing her eyes until it practically looked like she had found my stolen sleep and was angry about it. It's Staircase Appreciation Day. So, Monday, obviously. You know, if we were this bad at reading calendars at Wellesley, they probably would have sent us to Bryn Mawr. She smirked at what I assumed was supposed to be a clever quip. Fiona, in the desk across from me, frowned pointedly and sulked beneath a curtain of now burgundy bangs. I didn't understand what was going on, but I vaguely remembered something about Bethany being evil. Right. So, Staircase Appreciation Day. Is that a cake celebration? Or bagels, or... Bethany flashed a tight smile. You won't be celebrating with us. It's come to our attention that you haven't completed your mandatory mental health training. It's vital for a healthy workforce. I looked over at Fiona, who suddenly looked concerned. Bethany followed my gaze, and Fiona laughed nervously. Okay, I managed. But I haven't gotten login credentials or an email address or anything. I've been meaning to talk to Danny about it. I actually just used my personal computer, but then do the training on your personal computer, Bethany interrupted. It's quite self-explanatory. More vagueness. It didn't make any sense. Nor did my hazy memory of John C. Reilly in a lab coat. Nor did it being Monday when I swore it had just been Tuesday. The only thing I was sure of was that I felt hungover, which possibly explained everything else. Bethany crossed to Fiona's desk and put her hand on Fiona's shoulder. It's time, she said, with grim finality and a broad grin. Fiona mouthed something at me and then said, Stairs! Yay! With all the enthusiasm of a deflating balloon. As the two of them left, I actually heard Bethany say that stairs are very interesting, with nothing but cheerful sincerity. After they were gone, I decided to open my computer so I could at least pretend at an impossible task. But when I opened my browser, there was a website loaded. Some third party, proud to work with Somnicorp to promote a workplace that works for its workers. I played a video and was greeted by the chipper face of a racially ambiguous man wearing a commercially ambiguous fleece pullover. I was depressed once too, he began. I was headed to jail for murdering 3 people at a Barnes & Noble cafe. I felt like my life was over. So, I threw myself down a flight of stairs on Staircase Appreciation. The video froze and began tracking upward until the image was overtaken by static. I stared blankly until a multiple choice question appeared in green text over the jittery white and black. Based on Emmanuel's dilemma, who should he have killed instead? A. His mother. B. His daughter. C. Danny. What the fuck did any of this have to do with mental health? Maybe it was an obscure personality test? Perhaps a psychological inventory to determine how fucked I was or how fucked I should be. It was making me anxious. I decided to go for who I considered to be the most moral choice. Danny. My Danny sucked, but the name was obviously a coincidence. But You don't kill your mom. You definitely don't kill your daughter. So, I clicked C. The options remained on screen for a moment, but Emmanuel's face and pullover reemerged as a kind of glitchy ghost in the static. He finished where he'd left off. Pension day. I didn't die, but I got a compound fracture in my arm. See? The barely discernible silhouette of Emmanuel raised his arm, and I watched it dangle from an unnatural joint at his mid-forearm. With his other hand, he touched a sharp protrusion, wiggled it, and screamed. The static cut to a video of a man in what looked like a storage closet. He was vomiting into a trash can. The words, "Don't let cholera affect your mental health," flashed across the screen. Then I heard the man weeping. He raised his head, wiped his mouth with his sleeve, looked at the camera. It wasn't a coincidence. It was Danny. "Please," he coughed out. "Don't." I was so fixated on the growing look of terror on his face and on the surreal direction the video had taken that I overlooked a bit of movement in the background. A head peered out from behind a shelf of cleaning products. Its face smiled and its teeth chattered. Frank. I felt as though my stomach had been clamped and twisted, but I didn't know why in those first few seconds. And then Frank jolted forward, and the fear and memories came rushing back. The amount of guts you keep inside your belly are inversely proportional to the amount of Frank inside this room. I closed my browser the moment that bit of wisdom from Dr. Bev began to play out on screen. Danny's screams echoed in my mind in the silence that followed. I felt nauseated, trapped, and uncertain which of my memories were real. Had I spent a week on the third floor? Beverly had a family. I remembered that somehow, even though we never discussed it on Tuesday. The goat's name was Lilith. Another misplaced fact. I knew that Bev started each day with 2 joints and a mostly full bottle of Jim Beam, that he subsisted on a box of apple cinnamon Nutri-Grain bars, 3 bananas and goat milk, that he had eaten the same thing for 17 months. But I couldn't remember how I escaped. I stared at my desktop background, at the messy heap of icons. I began to stand. I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Glad you're feeling better, old sport." I shivered and tried not to scream as his fingers began to knead the flesh of my shoulder. "Danny? You missed a hell of a party. Bethany really is a treat, you know that? She brought asparagus macarons, the official food of Staircase Appreciation Day. Homemade, if you can believe it." His hand brushed gently across the side of my neck. "Actually, boss, I think I still have cholera. I should go home." I couldn't bring myself to turn around and look at him, but I could feel his presence behind me. Some part of him settled onto the top of my head as my chair creaked under his added weight. "Feeling like you still have cholera is actually a symptom of not having cholera anymore, old sport. If our nurse didn't tell you that, we may have to consider termination." "No!" I shouted. This time I tried to turn, but the gentle hand on my neck became firm. The nurse, he did tell me. I forgot. Symptom of the cholera." "Yeah." The word slithered out of his mouth and pooled onto the top of my head in a long, humid breath. "Anyway, you can't go home today. No. We're having a corporate lock-in for team building." This person that was not Danny kissed the top of my head and moaned. I didn't see him slink away afterward. I just sat for a moment, quietly hyperventilating before I stood, hurried to the elevator and then bolted to the front door of the lobby. The security woman at the front desk was laughing maniacally, flailing her head atop a perfectly rigid body. Everyone was insane. Everyone. I reached for the door handle and she shrieked, "You let it in!" I stopped, swallowed, and scanned the large front windows. It took me a few seconds to see the 4 fingers gently raking the glass from outside the top right corner. Fuck! What the fuck was happening? What was this place? My thoughts ranged from unhelpful to panic nonsense, but were interrupted by a familiar, chilling voice. "There you are! My goodness gracious! We were about to send out a search party." I turned to see Bethany's smiling face emerging from the doorway to the stairwell. "You got a perfect score on the mental health training. I always knew you were Somnicorp material." This time, I did scream. Frustration and fear and futility all boiling over. Bethany giggled as Fiona emerged from the doorway behind her. Fiona smiled uncharacteristically and shook her newly crimson bangs. Drips fell from them onto the floor. "You didn't tell me he was funny, too, Fiona," Bethany said. Fiona opened her mouth in response and blew a spit bubble that popped into a wet pinkish sheen around her mouth. "Anyway," Bethany sighed, wiping a pantomime tear from her eye, "you're gonna love the lock-in. Amulet Heritage Day begins at midnight, and it is truly an amazing holiday." Fuck that. I took the elevator back to the 5th floor and sat at my desk. I can't leave, but I don't really have a job, and my coworkers are all husks. I once thought that I didn't belong here. Dr. Bev called it imposter syndrome. He chuckled at the time, and now I understand the irony. But my lack of work has given me time to write. So, I've written this. This isn't a cry for help. It's a statement of purpose. There's a man on the 3rd floor who doesn't belong here either. I don't know what I'm doing. I rarely do. But if Bethany brings out a topaz amulet, I'm gonna steal it, and I'm gonna fucking save Dr. Beverly Crusher. I'll figure it out. But I'm open to suggestions. Hey everybody. Today's story was written by Decorative Gentleman on Reddit. I'll include a link in the description for his profile on Reddit so you can check out some of his other stories. Please give the author some support if you can. Let them know in the comments what you thought of today's story. This is the same author who wrote the Dodgy Antelope is Taking Over My Town story, as well as the He's Not Our Son story. The first of which is more comedy-focused like this one, and the second one's more of a really good kind of dark horror story about two parents whose son is slowly changing and turning into a bit of a hellraiser. I'll just leave it at that so I don't spoil anything, but that's a really good one. I think if you're into the darker horror, that's a really good one. The first parts of the story early on with the cake kind of reminded me a little bit of The Office, which is by far my favorite show, where they never seem to actually do any real work. It's always kind of about getting out of work. Even Michael, the boss, it's like constantly about parties and rabies awareness fun runs and just like the most random shit to do whatever they can to get out of work. And this kind of reminded me a little bit of that vibe, or that episode of Seinfeld where Elaine protests the office birthdays because they keep bringing cake by her office and keep singing happy birthday, and she gets annoyed with it. Obviously, this story goes in a completely opposite direction of that, because obviously this is a horror story. But I really like the way that it went and kind of keeps the comedy-centric plot going as the character meets Bev, the office nurse / veterinarian. I thought this, and I keep comparing stuff to TV shows, but I guess I watch too much TV. But this part kind of reminded me of Severance, with the deep in the office where they go into that strange office and it's filled with goats deep in the bowels of the building. This was written well before that, so I don't know, maybe Ben Stiller reads creepypasta, who knows, probably just a coincidence. Towards the end of the story, you kind of realize that The main character is stuck in a bit of a time loop situation. At least that's how I interpret it anyways. Things are changing slightly, but I think overall it's sort of a time loop sort of vibe. The story starts off on Tuesday, and he spends a week in the weird room with Bev on the 3rd floor, or until he dies, whichever comes first, I think. And then he starts back on Monday again with the note on his forehead, which I'm guessing he put there, reminding him to beware the amulet, I guess, from the amulet celebration day or whatever it is. Of course, the monster character Frank kind of adds another aspect of terror to this one. Is, if you leave the building, this weird gecko-like monster is going to disembowel you, and the amount of intestines inside you is inversely proportionate to the amount of Frank inside the room. I thought that was a great line. Huge thanks to Decorative Gentleman for letting me read this one. I'm a big fan of his work. I think he's a very funny author. He's got some really hilarious stories, as well as some really, really good, dark, scary stories as well. Very funny guy, very talented writer, and just overall very talented guy. We kind of joke in our writer circle, he's a bit of a Renaissance man. He's got some paintings on Instagram and things like that as well. So check him out on Reddit, and let him know in the comments what you thought of this one. I asked Decorative Gentleman, the writer of this, if he had anything to plug, and he said I should promote Red Pandas. Not like a book or anything called Red Pandas or a podcast, just red pandas, like the ones you see at the zoo. He said, go see them. They're very cute. So there you go. From Decorative Gentleman, the author himself. Go see the red pandas. A couple other quick things. The Terrors of the Forest audiobook is available now on Audible and on Amazon. This is a collection of 13 short, scary stories with a theme of horror in the woods. I'm going to have a couple sneak preview stories coming on the channel. I did one on Wednesday as well. There will be another one coming on Monday. And there's a scary story in the book written by me as well. So check out the audiobook if you're interested. It's called Terrors of the Forest. For anybody who missed it, there was a new Hollow's End story, came out on Monday. So if you did miss that one, I'll include a link at the very end of the video in the top right-hand corner or the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So you can check that out if you click on that link. That's about all I got for today. I'll be back on Monday with another story. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and yeah, I'll see you Monday. All right, have a good one.